So this is kind of the second time that I've addressed this topic, because it's kind of the second time we've run this course. And as you'll see, it's going to be a slightly different talk. I thought it would be really boring to do the same talk all over again. So we're going to take a slightly different tack at it this time. Last time around, the talk was ridiculously complicated and had a really long title. In fact, it had 2 titles, if you look closely. And today's talk is a bit simpler, technology in the body. And my kind of subtitle is to consider where are we going and kind of what does it mean for us, for you and for me and for humanity as a civilization. It's important to know who's in the room, who's talking to you though. So I thought I'd answer this question a bit, which is, who is this guy? So I'm a Northern Irish man, born in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and I'm in Canada by accident. I trained as a surgeon in the UK, came for a fellowship, got bitten by the Alberta bug, and then ended up staying. And I've been a professor here at the U of A since 2006. I just got promoted to associate professor last year. And 60% of my time, I'm a surgeon. So I see patients who have cancer, who need operations, and I operate on them. And I follow them up, and I'm on call for appendicitis and trauma and all that stuff. I'm one of the general surgeons over at the Royal Alexandra Hospital. That's what I do for 3 days a week. The other 2 days a week, I do academic stuff. And it's largely on the education side. It's largely teaching medical students and residents and organising teaching. So I'm currently the guy who's in charge of all the undergrad students at the medical school when they're doing surgery. So for years 1, 2, 3, and 4. As I've gone on, though, I have developed a bit more of an interest in research. When I started when I did my fellowship at the University of Calgary, I ended up doing a master's in medical education. And then when I came here, we started to change a lot of things in the surgery program. I ended up doing research based on that. And now I'm moving more, and I've done a lot. I did a PhD at home, and I've done a lot of qualitative research here. So I've both done numbers and qualitative stuff as well. And I think now, this kind of second phase of my career, I'm moving into thinking about some of the slightly more philosophical aspects of education. I'm looking at how we use language in teaching. I'm looking at how novices and experts kind of conceptualize each other. When a novice looks at an expert, what does he or she see? And when the expert looks at a novice, what do they see? But one of the things I'm very interested in is technology. Always have been. I'm the guy who, I'm probably the first person I know who had an email address in 1996. I'm the first person who had a blog or a wiki or a website of my own. And I've had several of those over the years. So I've been very interested in technology, which is how I come to be interested in this course, which is technology and the future of medicine. So here I am, a medical professional who's interested in technology as well. I am an endowed chair in surgical education at the university. I should let you know that. This is a guy called Tom Williams, who's another Brit who came over in the 50s actually and became chair of the Department of Surgery. And the chair's named in his name, so I have to acknowledge the donors to that chair. So here's my original title for the talk that I gave, I think it was back in September. And hopefully, I mean, I'm not going to ask for a show of hands, but hopefully people have had a chance to look at least portions of it on YouTube. It is a bit long, it's about 55 minutes. The URL's at the bottom, tinyurl/surgery101. And I guess that the title kind of reflects my slight confusion about the whole thing. The fact that I can't pick one thing because it's so big. So I'm the biological repairman. I'm the surgeon who repairs biology. And I'm reflecting, just like you're reflecting on something that's coming down the road. Like I'm not reflecting on the singularity, I'm reflecting on the coming singularity because it's coming. And then I kind of want to say, well, I'm a surgeon, so what's the surgeon's point of view? And it's about bodies, right? And I'm thinking about notions of embodiment in the age of spiritual machines. And we'll talk a bit more about what I mean by spiritual machines in a minute. And if you like, we can whip through the whole talk. There it is. That's the whole thing. And you can see there's lots and lots of stuff there. I think I talk a bit about, I introduce a topic, I talk about Kurzweil and the singularity. I talk about evolution for a bit. I talk about the brain. I talk about fun things about the body and bad things about the body. And then I talk about, there's quite a lot of science fiction and movies and books that come up. We talk about Philip K. Dick quite a bit and Cory Doctorow. And then we talk about the ways that the body might change. And a lot of people who've listened to the talk have said, you were just getting to the interesting point when you finished. Like we just got to the point where some of the philosophical questions were coming up and we ran out of time. So I thought what I'd do is maybe hit a couple of the high points like a couple of the key things that I came across in that set of slides, and then develop some of the ideas a bit further in the time that we have. For anybody who's watched it on YouTube, and there's like 300 people, which is nothing, right, compared to Coney, which is 70 million, right? We made a podcast out of it. I have a weekly podcast as well, and we made a podcast that's got about 2,000 listens or something, so more people have listened to it than actually seen it. So that's my definition. It's actually from an article in The Guardian of the singularity. And I could quote Kurzweil, and I could pull up the singularity is near and all that stuff. But this, I think, is the one that's most practical to me. It's a moment. It's not a period of time. It's a moment when technological change, which has already been fairly rapid, becomes so rapid and so profound that something fundamental changes. They actually talk about a rupture in the fabric of human history. And I think the point about the event horizon is quite good. And singularity, I mean, the whole point of a singularity is that information cannot travel from one side to the other. Like the Big Bang is a singularity. It's nice to think what was here in the universe before the Big Bang, but it's irrelevant because we can't know, we can't go back there. There's no way that it can affect us. There's no way we can affect it. So kind of a singularity divides things. And we're talking about something that's dividing. We've got a before and an after here. And kind of, I almost think it's a bit silly to try and figure out what the singularity is, because it's a singularity, right? Like, we can't understand what's beyond there. We can't go down the bottom of the black hole and get to the other side. So it's nice to think about what it is, but if the singularity does occur, and if it really comes, it's not going to be what we thought it was. And even if it is what we thought it was, it's going to be lots of other things as well. You might say, well, why is this surgical guy interested in this? I have a weekly podcast called Surgery 101, where we get surgeons and different people who give students like a 10-minute audio version of appendicitis or gallstones or something. And we've had, I think this week we had about 430,000 downloads total. We get about 2,000 downloads a day from about 150 countries around the world, all completely free. And we're about to launch an app, which is going to be 99 cents on the iPhone. It's going to have all the episodes that you can get on your iPhone or your Google phone. And they asked me to make a picture for it. So when you open the app, this is the picture that shows. So I went in the OR and I lifted up an instrument in one hand and my iPhone in the other hand, and we took a picture. And when I look at that, I think that's actually me right there on the screen. Right, one hand is the doing things in the people's insides with the instrument, and the other hand is the technology thing. So, and I think that's kind of why I'm standing here. That's why I'm interested in singularity, because I'm at least as interested in bodies as I am interested in technology. Here's a slide from the original talk, which is why biology is nice. It is free. You don't need to pay for it. Like, you get a free one when you're born. Fantastic. It's familiar. It's what we know. It's actually, you could argue that your body is actually you. I mean, if you go down the path where we talked about last time with Descartes, you could say, well, body is one thing and mind is another. But if your body's gone, you're kind of toast anyway, right? So you're located in your body and you're familiar with that body. You may not like it very much some days, but it's familiar to you. They make more of them by themselves. They kind of need to help each other with it, but they do self-replicate, and they mostly self-repair. Like, your body will mostly get better. I sometimes think that after I've done the operation, I'm like a recovery maintenance supervisor. Like, I don't make the wounds heal. The wounds heal, the bodies heal themselves. We just put them in the right position to actually heal up. So they do repair themselves. Long battery life. Imagine if you bought an iPhone today and it was going to be here 100 years from now. That's pretty impressive, that your heart goes for 100 years, or if you're lucky enough, or your lungs go for 100 years. It's also, like, you don't need to worry about what your blood pressure is, or how many red cells are circulating, or how your bone marrow is doing. It looks after itself. It's autonomous. We can think about other things like what's for supper tonight, or what's on the TV, or when I'm going to see that latest movie, because your body looks after the whole thing. There's an autonomic nervous system and a homeostatic system that looks after the whole thing. We actually evolved with it. I mean, this is something that we have spent, as a species, we spent a lot of time on. Spent like millions of years getting to this point. You think how long it took to get an opposable thumb? That's a big achievement in terms of biology. Think about how long it took to stand upright and walk on two legs. Think about how few other animals do that. Think about the brain. Think about the difference between a pigeon's brain and our brain. It's an enormous difference. So it's actually a very big thing, the body. It's a very, very impressive thing. The other thing that you kind of have to embrace about the body is that there's no alternative. Like, I cannot switch to something else. I can't upgrade to something else just right now because there's nothing else available. Maybe in the future there will be, but at the moment, it's kind of what we're stuck with. The downside of bodies, the downside of biology, is that they're a bit. If I was to summarize this slide in one word, I'd kind of say unruly. Like, it doesn't do what you want it to do. Like, you're not actually in charge of your body. There's a guy called Art Frank, who's a sociologist from the University of Calgary, who had cancer surgery a while ago, and he actually wrote about his experience. And the book he wrote is called At the Will of the Body, where he says that my body is in charge here, right? It gets symptoms, it gets sick, and try as I might, there's nothing I can do to stop it. The body is in charge here. And it's unreliable in that way. Like, we're sitting here and there's X number of colons and X number of hearts and X number of livers and X number of gallbladders and rectums and all the different organs we have, all working away by themselves. And if suddenly you have to run out and go to the bathroom right now, you don't have a lot of choice in that. Like, your body is going to just make you do that right away. Anybody who's been sick or had diarrhea knows what that is like. Your body lets you down all the time. It's fragile as well. Like, if we get hit by a meteor right now, we're all dead. If I open this box and reveal a high-intensity radiation source, we are all dead because we don't like physical pressure. We don't like extreme heat or extreme cold. We don't like high levels of radiation. We're fragile in that way. There's no backup function. Like, if my phone, which is over there, if my phone crashes tonight, I go back, I hook it up to my Mac, I press restore, and it's just like nothing happened, right? If you get hit by a bus on the way home, that feature does not exist. You are gone, you are toast, you are never coming back. No backup. Sorry about that. It's got no warranty, and it's single use only. So you cannot take it back to the maker. You cannot phone up God and say, I'm sorry, I got a lemon for a body. I'm the child who dies because of lymphoblastic leukemia at 2 years of age. I want another go-round. That doesn't exist. You get what you get, and if you get a bad one, tough, that's it, you're over. And it does have a limited shelf life. Like, maybe you don't want to die when you're 100, maybe you don't want to die when you're 120, maybe you want to live till 500. Good luck with that, because your body's going to run out before you maybe want to run it out. And anybody who saw the first talk has heard me talk about my grandmother. I remember when she was, shortly before she died, she said, I'm trapped in this rubbish body, I'm trapped in this garbage body. It doesn't do what I want to do anymore. It's old and it's shrunken and it's kind of hunched over and my hands don't work anymore. And I'm the 18-year-old inside. I'm like I always was, but my body is not. So it wears out and it goes away, and maybe that's not so good. Some of the basic functions, as you are aware, are messy. Like, we have to kill other organisms, usually heat them up, unless you like sushi, and then chew them up with our teeth and then ingest them. And then something messy happens inside, and what's left over gets squirted out from one of 2 orifices. It's kind of a bit messy, I mean, it's just not, it's not very neat. Making new units is fun. I have to admit, making new units is very fun, which is why sex is so fun. But it is slow. Like, say you wanted to go and buy a new iPhone today, and the guy in the shop said, right, it'll be ready for you in 9 months. It'd be very unimpressive. You want it today, right? 9 months for one of these new units. It's crazy. Limited processor speeds. Like, there's only so fast that it can go. It's only so much weight that I can lift, or so fast I can run, or how many words I can read per minute, or how fast I can type or something. Some people are quick and some people are slow. But compared to a computer, compared to digital technology, our processor is pretty poor. And limited capacity for upgrades. There are some upgrades available. Like, if you want your breasts augmented, or you want cosmetic surgery, you can get some of those things done. They're not terribly reliable, but they will actually work. On some basis at least, but the capacity is kind of limited. Like, I showed a slide in the other talk where Mr. White has a problem and he has to have a bodyectomy, right? Have his body removed. And the surgeon says, he says, well, I don't want my body to be removed, I love my body. And the surgeon says, well, we can take your head off instead. I mean, you cannot get a new head. You can't just say, I'm going to get rid of this part and put the other part on. I had a friend died recently from liver failure, actually, at 40 years of age. And she died because we do not have a capacity to replace the liver. We can put you on a heart pump for a while. We can put you on a lung and a ventilator thing. We can put you on dialysis, artificial kidney. We cannot replace your liver. And if your liver's toast, you're toast as well. So some of the features of biology are nice, and some of the features are a bit nasty. So last time I said there are some alternatives we might consider to these bodies that we're stuck in. Option number one is control. I think what I said last time is kind of get the body where it lives, like go to its house and get it around the throat and understand what's actually happening. And we are a long way from that. I mean, as a surgeon who looks after people with disease all the time, I have no idea what's going on in the body most of the time. Like, we have things that we do that work most of the time, but there are still complications that happen that we don't understand, or diseases that respond or don't respond to treatment for reasons that we don't really grasp yet. So we don't really have a good control. It would be nice if we had something like this. This is a photograph from Wired magazine from a couple of years ago. And if you look closely, it says that it's a medication cabinet in your bathroom, right? And the medication is Tumor X, 30 milligrams. It says, or for the treatment of lung cancer, take 1 tablet 3 times a day for 30 days until complete tumor regression. Like, imagine you had a medication you could take that would switch off whatever the disease is. Just turn it off like that. That's what we're talking about in terms of control. And at the moment, we're kind of like, in the other talk I talked about my father and how he used to fix the TV when it wouldn't work. Like, you go up to the TV and he'd go, hit it on the side. Like, that would do something to it. Like, he has no idea how a TV works, presumably at that point. But he just whacks it to see if it makes things better. And that's our current level of understanding. That's my current level. Of somebody who's supposed to be an expert in this, it's my current level of understanding. I take diseases that are occurring at a molecular, microscopic level, and I take a big, sharp piece of steel, and that's my level of treatment. Really, I should be able to get in there, switch those genes off, change the molecules that are being produced, and do a whole different thing. So we're miles away from the control thing. Option 2 is augmentation, and to be honest, this is interesting. Almost the least interesting part of it is physical augmentation. So here's a sprinter. I think it's Jan Pistorius or somebody who's a double amputee, but who sprints on these artificial legs, and there he's augmenting his injured body, of course. In fact, there's a whole argument about whether he should be able to run in the Olympics or not, because it may be that in fact his performance is better than it was before the amputation, which is quite a shocking thing. Like, he's better now that he doesn't have any legs to run on. That's a big thing. To me, the more interesting aspect of augmentation is augmentation of the non-physical, like augmentation of your mind. Like, for instance, at the moment, I'm pretty sure everybody here is using some sort of augmentation, whether they admit it or not. Because when you need to know something or you want to look something up, you reach in your pocket and you pull out your iPhone or your Google phone, you type in the thing and look it up on Wikipedia, right? That's in some form, that's not stuck on your head, at least not at this point in history, but it is augmenting your abilities in some way. You're accessing some external information bank that you can then get information from to make decisions. And I think at the moment, actually, I'm a bit disappointed with Apple, because at least in Canada, they have this thing called Siri, which is the artificial intelligence on the iPhone, and it doesn't know any locations in Canada yet. Like, if you're in the States and you say, where's the nearest pizza joint, it can tell you. But if you're in Canada, it doesn't know anywhere. But hopefully when that comes online, it'll be a bit more useful. Like, it'd be like having a personal assistant on your phone that can find things for you and do things for you very easily. And we'll talk a bit more about that later on. So there's physical augmentation, there's non-physical augmentation. Backing things up would be useful as well. This is a cover that Kim uses quite a bit from Time. 2045, the year man becomes immortal. That's the cover story about the Singularity. And essentially, the idea behind backing, I think backing up is interesting because you have to decide, first of all, what it is you're backing up. Like, what is it that we can take out of the body and put somewhere else and still be us? Like, you know, for a lot of the talk about the Singularity, we don't really want to get too involved in the down and dirty details. Like, we don't want to know. We'll leave that to the neuroscientists. We'll leave that to the nanotechnologists. We'll leave that to the artificial intelligence guys. They can sort out the messy details. If somebody's backing me up, I want to know what it is that's getting backed up. And I want to know what's going to run from the backup later on, or what I'm going to be restored from. Because if I come back and I'm kind of a handicapped, disabled vegetable person who can't use my arms and legs, why am I coming back? You know, what are we backing up to? I know we've got a backup system for the medical records in the hospital where I work, and the backup system, it's very basic. It takes off the patient's name and the patient's date of birth, and that's what we're backing up. And I would actually argue we're not backing up anything useful then, because all the other stuff is gone. We're just backing up basic demographic details. So I think we've got to figure out what it is we're actually doing when we say backup, not just we'll back up some mysterious cloud that is personality, that is us, and then put it somewhere else in some mysterious way, because we've got to get down to some brass tacks when it comes to backup. Option 4 is kind of what you do with that backup. So, or what you do with the information you've extracted, that backup, like where do you put it? If you could put it back in the body, I suppose, but what if you put it somewhere else? What if you run on what Kurzweil calls a substrate? Something else. This is where we're getting quite far down the line. Like, I'm not quite sure what that would look like, to run on something else. I'm not even sure what I mean by run. I mean, I'm using terminology from computing, right? Like I'm a computer program that I'm running somewhere. And here's an article from the Independent talking about by 2040 you'll be able to upload your brain. But you've got to upload it to somewhere. What does that look like? And then option 5, which Kurzweil does get around to talking to at the end of the book, the Singularity book, is talking about abandoning the physical entirely. Like, is there something we can extract from our bodies that doesn't need to run on a physical substrate at all? He talks about, the phrase he uses is saturating the local space-time continuum with information. Like, there's some way that we can exist in a non-corporeal way, kind of as pure information. And it's a little bit abstract, it is a little bit out there. Although, to be honest, that's the thing I've got the most emails about after the first talk. People have emailed me and said, well, that's the part that I want to talk about, the idea of cosmic consciousness, the idea that we can exist outside the physical reality. So, that's my kind of 15-minute run through the old talk. I wanted to kind of draw out some of the themes and some of the philosophical things I've been talking about, and then I have some scenarios for you. And I want to leave plenty of time for discussion at the end, because I think that these are kind of difficult topics. So, as I said, we're talking about bodies, and it's an uncomfortable thing, it's a personal thing, because we all have one and we all have opinions on them, And I don't want to diss anybody's body in particular, because I'm quite attached to my body. I don't really want to lose it, thanks very much. I quite like having one. But they are controversial. Here's an example from this exhibition about bodies, where they took people who had, in all fairness, donated their bodies knowing what was going to be done to them, and then they were dissected and posed in certain ways. There's a body riding a horse with no skin on, And here's another one, some guy who's playing football. In fact, I was involved in a project recently in the Faculty of Medicine. A lady from Finland was over doing her postdoctoral work, and she was looking at ideas of beauty in medicine. Like, what do different medical professionals consider beautiful? And I had a chat with her about what surgeons consider to be beautiful. And some of the things that we consider to be beautiful in the body, people would find horrific and disgusting. But in fact, I have certain ideas of beauty and you have certain ideas of beauty, and they may not be quite the same thing. And that's kind of what it is when we're talking about bodies. I want to come at this maybe from the idea that your body is essentially what you use to interact with the world around you. Like, there's me, and then there's the outside. You could say there's like me and then the other, I suppose. Me and you, separate things. And I'm located in the body, and the world is pretty much everything outside that. And what I'm going to say next comes from a few books that I've been reading recently. One is a guy called Stephen Johnson, Where Good Ideas Come From, where he talks about the history of innovation, like how we've innovated as a species up to this point, like what we've done with different sorts of technologies. Next one's actually James Gleick, who wrote the big book on chaos theory, and he's written a book recently about called The Information, which is about just how our relationship with information has changed over the course of history. He talks about a history, a theory, and a flood. The idea that the amount of information that's coming is getting quicker and quicker. And I don't know about you, but as I said on the YouTube video, I've got a stack of books at home I haven't had time to read. I've got a stack of PlayStation games and DVDs I haven't had time to play or to watch yet, because there's new stuff coming all the time, and I'm kind of getting overwhelmed. I need to kind of employ someone to do my reading for me and give me a summary later on, or employ somebody to watch the DVDs for me and tell me whether they're any good or not, because I just don't have enough time, because information is coming, at least from my point of view, kind of quicker and quicker as we go on. And the other one is Kevin Kelly, who's actually co-founder of Wired magazine, and he wrote a book called What Technology Wants. Like, the idea that technology is a thing that wants something. Like, it's not a passive agent. It's like there's something that technology is driving us towards. In fact, he makes the argument that technology is actually, where it's heading anyway, is that technology is another form of evolution. Like we're evolving into technological beings. Like technology is another form of life on the planet, which is different from biological life, which is quite interesting. So I'd suggest if we go way back to the start, when we get up out of the swamp and walk upright on two legs, the first things that we do are develop some kind of tools that allow us to interact with the world around us, right? I mean, you go back to Stanley Kubrick 2001, Space Odyssey, you've got the chimps and the bones and using them for tools at the start of the movie. And we develop things like, there's a bunch of things like this, but we develop fire, we develop the wheel, we develop tools to interact with the world around us. And that's kind of where the technology story starts. And then you fast forward a bit and you get up to things like the steam engine and the internal combustion engine, and still we're interacting with the world around us, still we're making a difference. We're actually, putting things in, combusting things, steam arises, action occurs, we're interacting with the world around us. And you look at where we are today in terms of devices, there's any number of devices. Like, you could actually argue that pretty much everything in this room is technology. And you may not think about it like that. I mean, the cameras are clearly technology, but the seats are technology as well. Like, they're better than the original version, which was a rock that you used to sit on under a tree in the savanna plains of Africa. They're still technology. Like, the desk you're sitting at are technology, lights are technology, the doors, the exit sign, all technology, except we don't see it anymore. It's like electricity is technology. You don't really think about that as a technology, but that's actually what it is. It's just all around us and we don't see it anymore. I think when you're thinking about technologies, that's kind of where you want to go with the idea of the singularity. You want to say, well, what if some of the technologies that are kind of just breaking the boundaries right now, just starting, suddenly became ubiquitous, suddenly became as free as air and as cheap as water and as ubiquitous as air. What if we had all this stuff at our fingertips right away, all this technology just surrounding us? What would that mean for the body? Because largely it's about, and this is not projecting very well, but it's a picture of a really high-end chip. I no longer understand what my phone does. Like, I don't understand how it runs. Like, somebody made it, and it's very complicated, and it's got some software on it that's very complicated, and I have no idea what it's doing. I suspect, if you go back to the steam engine, people actually could tell you, well, you put the stuff in here and it burns and steam comes up and things move and then things happen. But if I drive home in my car tonight and it breaks down, I have no idea how to fix it. Even when I go to the Subaru garage, the guy says, let me pull out my laptop and plug in the laptop. And the laptop will tell me what's the matter with your car, because I can't tell by looking at it. Because the technology is kind of one step removed now. We need technology to interpret what's happening with the other technology. And I think that's kind of where we're going with the idea of technology, that it's getting beyond us a bit now. Like, we don't quite understand some of the higher end stuff in technology because it's very complicated. Think about how we related with information. I mean, go way back when we're talking about oral language develops and then written language develops. We've got stone tablets and papyrus, I suppose, and then we've got Gutenberg and the printing press and all that stuff. And now most of our information is exchanged through email. Like, we're writing and we're typing and we're communicating with digital information. And really, what we're doing is just using ones and zeros all the time. Like, we went from physical communication strategies like books and tablets and so forth, and now we're moving to digital stuff, ones and zeros. Like, when I send an email, it's not words, it's just a string of ones and zeros, really. The computer does it all for you. So, I think you've got technology largely serving as a way for us to interact with the world, as a bridge between the body and the world. And largely that interaction is occurring nowadays through information, through the exchange of information. And I think the thing is that it's like Blake said about, if you look into the abyss looks into you as well. I think because we've used technology in this way, because we're changing the way we relate with information, we're actually changing ourselves. We're changing our notions of ourselves. We're looking at ourselves differently and more critically than we did before. And in fact, we look at the world differently as well. Like, if you're interested in physics, there's a whole thing going on about the Higgs boson particle at the moment. Like, are we going to find it by the end of this year or not? What about these neutrinos that are going faster than the speed of light? What about the Hubble Space Telescope? What about looking back into history, looking back at the Big Bang, our technology lets us look at the world differently than we could when we didn't have that level of technology, and lets us look at ourselves differently as well. So I'm talking about somebody who gets a cancer because of a gene switching on. We wouldn't have that because of Watson and Crick, and without the technology they developed to look at DNA. I'm quite interested in how this intersects with like the real world right now. So I did a study last summer looking at how students are using iPhones in the hospital. We just sat them down and we talked to them about how they were using the devices, iPhones and iPads and tablets and Google stuff and all that, Android phones. And we did a survey as well. We got like, I think 200 or 300 people. And they said it's changing how they interact with people. Like when they have something they don't know, they look it up on their phone right away. And they're starting to get comfortable with not knowing stuff. Like, I don't know the name of this drug, or I don't know the dose of this drug, but I'm actually happy enough because my phone will tell me. And some of them are actually starting to express the idea that they're a bit uncomfortable with that. Like they're saying, well, how do I know my phone's right? Like, if I don't know, and the phone doesn't know, and the phone gives me the wrong information, am I really happy to prescribe that drug or not? Because their relationship with information has actually changed, and the what I would call the location of knowing is starting to move outside of them. Like, they don't have to have it in their head anymore if they can have it somewhere outside their head. So they're actually starting to change that in practice. There was a nice study that they looked at, this was in the States, they looked at a group of doctors who started using alphanumeric text paging on the wards and kind of text messaging back and forth. And the study found that they increased the efficiency of everybody. The team worked better because they could send, instead of having to phone someone up and speak to them on the phone, they sent them a little text message to say, come and see Mrs. So-and-so, or the serum potassium is whatever, you know. But when they spoke to the nurses on the ward, the nurses said, our doctors are more globally connected, but they're less locally here. Like, they're not here for us. Like, we speak to them, we're in the middle of a conversation and they get a text message and they turn away from us because the text message is more important than we are. So the technology is doing something to us. Like, it's changing that left-hand side of the slide. It's changing what's happening and how we interact with I guess how we interact with ourselves and how we interact with each other as well, just through the influence of technology. And it's better, it makes things more efficient, no question about it. But there may be some unintended consequences there that we maybe don't see. And this is actually, I think, where the rainbows and unicorns vision of the singularity is very amusing to me. You know, like the singularity will descend from heaven like Jesus in a golden chariot. And war will end, and hunger will end, and no more poverty, no more disease, fantastic. We all go off into the sunset, have a great time. That isn't how it's going to be. Because it's not going to come all at one place all at one time. Some people will have and some people will have not. And we're going to do with the singularity what we've done with every other technological intervention, which is screw it up big time. We're going to mess it up. And we're going to have people who have it and people who don't have it. And it's not going to be very nice because we're human beings. No way around that, I'm afraid. So that's my definition again of the singularity. This change that's rapid and profound. And I actually found a kind of a singularity article in my field from March the 6th, which is only a few days ago. It's actually from the Canadian Medical Association Journal. And it's a little editorial, and the title is Surgery Down for the Count. And the guy there's actually two surgeons who are writing this. And they basically say that surgery is a Victorian application of technology, that our understanding of diseases is advancing rapidly enough that in a few years we won't need surgeons anymore. And the surgeons better find out a better way to spend their time, or a more productive way to be, instead of cutting people up. And in fact, to be fair, I mean, as a surgeon, I think they've actually got their finger on something there. It doesn't apply to all surgeons. Certainly, I mean, the patients that I see, if I had a better option than cutting them open with a knife, I would go for it, definitely. I'd be happy. I actually look forward to the day when me and the guys that I work with are all retired and out of work, because we don't need to do this anymore. But it has happened in things like cardiac surgery. Like, the cardiologists have got such a good control on the heart now, and they can open up blood vessels they weren't able to before, and they can put little stents in and hold the vessels open. The need for cardiac surgery, like the need for people to open up your heart with a knife, has dropped away quite dramatically. And now it's actually quite hard to get a post as a cardiac surgeon, because there isn't as much of a need for that anymore. So I actually think that as technology is changing, it's changing things like surgical practice. So I think if I was to summarize kind of, if I was to summarize everything I said in the last talk, I'd put it in this diagram. Like, the idea is we understand the body first. And maybe the reason why the bar is wide there is because we have a kind of a good grasp, but maybe we don't know a lot about it, but we have a good grasp on at least what's needed there. Like, there's some genome stuff, there's some pathology stuff, there's some biological stuff, there's some molecules, there's some tissue stuff. We understand what we have to understand, even if we don't understand it very much. You know what I mean? Then the next step is control, and then augment. And the bar is getting narrower here because I'm not quite sure what I mean by augment. And then we back up and abandon, and finally, as Kurzweil says, transcend the physical, transcend biology. And that's why it's at the bottom and it's really narrow, because I don't know what's in there. But it's also kind of out of the box, because I don't really grasp. I'm not really too sure what I mean by transcend. Some of the issues that we're going to run into as we go forward into this. One is the idea of connectedness. Like, the idea of me being me and you being you, and there being some connection between us. And that may well change as we go forward. Either, I mean, to be honest, I think the big danger with technological advancement and the big difficulty with the singularity may actually be solipsism. Like, we all turn inside, we all look at each other and just sit and have a relationship with our iPhone the whole time. Whenever I pull my phone out when we're walking around the streets, my wife always laughs at me and says, well, you're like this, looking at the iPhone. You see people walking into street lamps and everything when they're so fixed with their technology. And we may actually turn away from each other and turn to the technology, which is a kind of a worry. Identity is going to be an issue as well. And this is largely on the AI side of things. Like, if you've got something that's an artificial intelligence that's as good as you, or that resembles you, or is the same as you in some way, then what's me and what's you then? We're getting mixed up at that point. Like, say I copy myself. Hey, there's 10 copies of me. Are we all me? Or is only the original me? It's kind of Philip K. Dick land. As I said, we're going to come up with ideas of fragility, because bodies are fragile, things are breaking down all the time, and something has to be done, kind of. I was talking about a friend of mine recently who was diagnosed with cancer at the age of 42, and at the time of diagnosis he was incurable, and he was a surgeon actually, and he had multiple tumors throughout one part of his body, and he actually phoned up a surgeon in another part of the world to say, I need a transplant. I want you to take this riddled cancer set of organs out and give me a new set from somebody else. And the transplant surgeon said, well, I can't do that, because the drugs that I would need to keep your new organs alive would actually make your cancer go crazy, so it's just not possible. And the trouble is, people are dying every single day from diseases like this. People are looking for solutions all the time. And when I think if you were to put up an ad on the internet today to say, we have technology that can back up your brain right now, you would get volunteers for that. You get crazy people who would volunteer for it, certainly, but you get somebody who's going to die next week and they would volunteer for it as well. Because the desire to be alive is very strong, because we're fragile. Time is a big theme as well, as I said. We only have a certain amount of time, and if you could extend that, if you could make it longer, especially say you were rich and you could grow another body and transfer yourself into that. And this is a trope from actually popular fiction. There's lots of books that talk about personalities moving from one body to another. Imagine if you could extend the time that you have. What would that be? Loss is a big theme as well, obviously, because we're fragile and because we go sometimes and we die. That's going to be a theme in the singularity. Like, what do you do when something is lost? Can you bring it back? Should you bring it back? Fear is going to be a big theme as well. I think it's from Terminator 3, Rise of the Machines. Because when people talk about technology, talk about artificial intelligence, they think about things like this. They talk about the machines taking over, right? Like the Matrix movies, right? They're going to put us all in a big machine and then kind of farm us or something, and then they'll rule the world and yada yada yada. Or Skynet will take over in the Terminator series of stories. So fear is actually quite a big thing. I actually think if we get it right, though, technology and us will kind of come together. And when Kurzweil talks about spiritual machines, I think he's kind of talking about us. He's talking about us merging with our technology in some way. And again, I'm being very vague here about what that way would actually be. But it's not that the machines would be in charge of us or that we would be in charge of them. It's kind of that we take on some of the abilities that they have, they take on some of our abilities, and we become spiritual machines together. And when you go past that, it becomes very exciting indeed. When you say, well, we can be here for a long time, we're not frail anymore, we can exist, and we can do things outside the realms of the physical, it starts to come up to some philosophical points, which is really, when you take away the demands of the physical, what is it we're actually here for? So you could argue, I go to work every day so that I can do things so they give me money. And then I take that money and I go to the store and I buy food. I need food to live. I buy some water as well. I need food and water. And I need shelter as well because it's minus 30 here in the winter. So that's why I go to work. But if I didn't have to eat anymore and didn't have to shelter myself anymore because I was impervious, maybe I wouldn't need the money anymore. If I didn't need the money, I wouldn't need to work. So what do you do with your time then if you don't have a job? You know? Like, what's the purpose of this? If you take us out of the biological, because a lot of the things, in fact, I would imagine almost everything we do on a day-to-day basis is connected to the biological. Like, we're all wearing clothes because it's a bit cold outside today, it's a bit windy outside today. Like, we all had to have something to eat today probably, because otherwise you would have been hungry, right? You would have been tired, you would have fallen over at some point. You've all drank some water today because we have to drink water to stay alive. What if those things no longer applied anymore? You take all of that stuff away, what's left? Because to some extent you'd say, well, we're existing so that we can exist, right? You kind of, you live so you can work, or maybe you work so you can live. Take that away, what's philosophically underneath the whole enterprise? So, we've got about maybe half an hour left. Let's have a bit of a chance for discussion. The big questions I want you to consider are, what would it mean if we move to something better than biology? Like, as I've said, something that's not fragile, it could be backed up or something that was reliable, something that you could upgrade maybe, something that had a low rate of breakdown, and you can maybe back up. As I said, maybe you wouldn't have to eat or sleep or poop anymore, maybe no work, no poverty, no war, there's the rainbows and unicorns again, no need to reproduce unless you really wanted to, right? No pressure of time. Like, if you really want to write a thesis that's going to take you 100 years, you can do that because you're not going to die, right? No separation. Like, you don't have to lose anybody. You can keep the people that you want forever because they don't have to die anymore. And no death, of course, unless you decide that. I mean, if you wanted to, you could work. I suppose if you wanted to, you could simulate eating, or maybe you could just stay in your body and eat anyway. You can reproduce if you wanted, but you didn't have to. You could be separated if you wanted. You could seal yourself into a capsule and fire yourself off to Alpha Centauri and take however many, tens of thousands of years to get there. And you could switch yourself off. Of course, you could die if you wanted to. But it would become voluntary. And this sounds like science fiction, right? It really does sound like science fiction. And at the moment, it is science fiction. But the point is, the Singularity is going to take us to some of these places potentially. Other big questions are, if your body changes, are you still you? Or are you something or somebody else? I mean, as I said, I'm kind of attached to my body. What would it take for somebody to convince me to step outside it? Like, how sure would I have to be that the horse that I'm going to jump on is actually a real viable, visible horse that works? Or maybe I should just stick with my fleshy, meaty, squishy body, because it's what I'm used to. And what do you do if you actually don't want this? Like, what do you do if you just want to live and die the way you've always lived and died, the way your forebears have always lived and died for 1,000 years? What do you want? What happens if you don't want to transcend? So I've got a total of 5 scenarios. I've got maybe 5 minutes for each one. So any questions so far before we go to the scenarios? I want to give you a chance to kind of digest what I've said. Okay, let's hit scenario number 1. So all of your friends are buying a new iPhone 10, right? The iPhone 4S has just come out, of course. So this 6 generations on. It's got a transcranial cortical interface. And what that means is it's got a little thing you wear on your ear, like an earring, like nothing in your head, but it communicates with your brain on the back of your ear. And it projects a heads-up display onto your retina by interacting with your optical cortex. It also has a new version of Siri. It's got a personal assistant, AI, which can screen and auto-answer your email. So imagine, like, all that crap email that you get, the AI takes care of it all. And it only presents a few emails every day that are really critically important. So you haven't bought it yet. Your friends have all bought it. And you notice that your friends aren't texting you just as much as they used to. Because, of course, when they get a text, it comes up on their Retina, like right away. And your old-fashioned phone, your iPhone 9, doesn't work with the Retinal display. So would you buy one?
I guess one of the questions that you asked us was what really defines us. And if I were to clone myself, let's say, the other Adrian, he might drive the car the way I do, but what I'm definitely sure about is that he's not going to feel the way I do. And this is the question. I mean, I know how I feel. I don't know how he's going to feel. That's the...
Well, see, this is the problem, because you've got... I mean, if you come back to that essential duality, which is me and the other, right? I'm pretty sure, well, as far as I can be sure, I'm fairly sure how I feel about things. But if you take me and put me outside me and make me the other, I don't know how that person feels, right? They're not me.
Mm-hmm. And the question if, are we going to be able to differentiate between the real world and virtual things that we might encounter? I think that question was posed like about 2,000 years ago, when in Buddhism they talked about Maya, basically the illusion. It's basically the same thing. We don't know if I'm looking at you, I see a significance more than all the atoms that basically compose your body.
Yeah.
So we probably won't know, and we probably won't care about that anymore, because we deal with significances from this point on. So if you're going to feed me a sense of being a surgeon, I'm fine with that, and I'm probably going to be fine with if you were some sort of a fancy robot like in that you presented, basically. And if he's going to give me the same feeling and he's going to have the same way of communicating with me, I won't know, and I don't know if I would really care about that, because I'm getting the feedback that
I think that's interesting, because a lot of the talk on singularity comes from a very kind of rational, technical, westernized kind of technological viewpoint, where the body is the body and the spirit can be reduced to ones and zeros, and we'll just put it somewhere else, right? You come at it from a different perspective. You come at it from Buddhism or some of the Eastern mythologies. That doesn't play at all, right? In fact, the body is just something that you're here in a transitory form, and when you die, you go somewhere else, right? And in fact, you could argue there's actually something, you wouldn't think so, but there's some connection between the two there. Like the computer geeks are saying there's something in the body we want to take out and back up somewhere. And the Buddhists are saying, well, there's something in the body that goes off to somewhere else. So we agree there's like a soul or an identity there separate from the body. We can't quite agree on whether it's ones and zeros or something a bit less tangible. What about your iPhone? Would you buy one? Would anybody not buy one? Why wouldn't you buy one? Or why wouldn't you buy one?
A natural contrariness leading to Ludditism.
That's fair enough.
One of the reasons why I wouldn't buy an iPhone, firstly, I don't support iPhone. The one part about the AI filtering junk emails, our knowledge is based on what is known and what is not known. If you filter out everything that we assume is junk right now, we don't know where we stand with respect to it. So there's a double negative that factor comes into play. And as far as communication is concerned with everybody around us, there will be, electronic communication is not the only form of communication that we're dealing with. There are other forms of communication through resonance, through waves, through interference. Just for that reason, I don't think that the iPhone is something that I would buy.
Okay. Any other comments on the iPhone? Because I mean, I suspect, like a lot of people in this room, I've already got the AI doing this for me, and it's free, right? I've got a Gmail account, and I'm training the Gmail filter to put stuff in spam. And I've got to the point now where I don't even look at the spam box anymore. I've got like 400 emails in spam, and I never look at it because it's that good. And I'm thinking that the patterns of communication that I have are not infinitely variable. And clearly the technology is up to the job. Occasionally I look at the spam filter and it's all crap. Why would I look in there? I don't look anymore. Yes?
I think when you're asking the question, would you buy the iPhone? Like him, I wouldn't really support Apple, even though I am. But it's the point of trying to use the technology that we have available, which is interfacing between that ability to have a heads-up display, the ability to filter out information. I think that is actually not bad, because eventually that's where we're heading. And the key difference that I'm finding, whether you would use the iPhone or not, is how would you be able to interpret all of that information that you're getting? Because this information is going to keep growing, it doesn't matter, it's not going to stop for us. And I think what will depend on our survival is how we can integrate and use that information to our advantage for a particular situation or whatever we're living for.
Yeah.
And I think that's what really the real question would be, in my sense.
And you'll notice that this scenario is not 100 years down the road. Like, we've already got AI screening email, and we've already got, probably at Christmas time, Google is going to produce a pair of glasses that's going to produce a heads-up display. And they're not quite clear how it's going to project yet. It's going to be on the inside of the glasses, or it's going to actually project on your retina. But it won't be inside the body, it's going to be outside the body projecting back. But that's coming like this year. It's not science fiction. Scenario 2, this is starting to get sticky. So you're at a university, your research field is growing increasingly complex and arcane. So you've got a colleague who tells you that he's been running this parallel personality on a hard drive, and it runs 24/7 whether he's asleep or not. And it's basically, it's this new thing from Google, right? It's reviewing new information for him, and it gives him a summary every 7 days of the real stuff that he really needs to know, you know. The personality is also helping him write his manuscripts, and his productivity has become astronomical. Quietly, he tells you the personality has started to suggest new research directions for him, and it's also giving him careers advice. Would you follow suit? Because anybody who's at this university, there's a process called FEC, which is Faculty Evaluation Committee, and this guy's going to be fantastic at FEC. He's going to have so many publications and be so up with the literature and so forth.
Dr. Solis gave me the microphone, so I guess I have to say something. So I do come from a basic sciences research background, so I should have a strong opinion on this, but I'm finding it difficult because if it's a parallel personality, I assume you could program it to have certain ethical and moral standards.
Well, he's in control of it, right? He can, you know, twiddle it
I'd
off.
follow suit. I'd go for it. Sure. I'll take a firm stance.
Because think of how much more productive you would be. Like, you don't have to read the papers yourself. You just kind of read the summary of the papers, and it'll give you the summary of the abstract, and the really key points from the paper. Maybe a figure or two, right? And
that's how I read papers anyway. So.
Yeah, and but it's doing it faster, hopefully, right? I mean, I had an interesting discussion with a colleague actually last week who's, both of us are colorectal surgeons at the Royal Alexandra, and I was telling him about a new paper that I'd read about something, and I thought it was very good. And he said, how do you find time to keep up with the journals? Like, how do you go to the journal every month? And I said, I don't. I'm on Facebook, and I liked the Association of Surgeons of Colon and Rectum, the American College of Surgeons for Colon and Rectum, on Facebook. And once every couple of days, they put out an abstract of a paper, and I just get it in my Facebook feed. So I've already got an AI that's selecting pieces of information for me, that's keeping me ahead of my colleague. And he thinks he has to go to the journal and read it up in paper. And I've got this popping into my inbox every couple of days.
I suppose if you're still using your judgment to critique that information that's being presented to you, and as well with the new research directions and career advice that are being suggested, you still have control over whether you implement those suggestions or not.
But I'm not going to the journal and reading every single article and doing the selection. I'm letting them do the selection for me. Now, I presume they're not using AI to do that, but it's not a very big jump to say, well, we'll just have the AI do the journal thing from now on.
If it's creating knowledge, yes. If it's just rehashing knowledge, then no.
But what if this parallel personality can see things in the data that the original human being can't see? What if it's actually being more creative than he is?
It can be creative with respect to where one stands. However, in the largest sphere, is it generating knowledge and new information, which is where its limitation would be. And I think that's the critical juncture between creating knowledge and just rehashing knowledge.
Okay. Any other comments on that, scenario 2?
How long would it take for that parallel personality to diverge enough from you to no longer be you?
Well, I want to know how long would it take before the parallel personality wants its name on the paper as well, right? and it wants to be first author. It's doing all the bloody writing anyway, right?
I was just thinking, I mean, it's an interesting technical question, and that could be really helpful, sure, but I would think that would already be in conflict with existing policies around self-plagiarism and existing practices around not really okay to pay some other guy to write your paper, even if it's not actually a plagiarized paper.
Well, even if it's not actually a person, right? We're not paying anybody to do anything.
I realize it's not. I'm just saying that there may be existing policy that would already frown upon the practice, regardless of whether you could technically do it. It might be something that you would have an additional thing to think about as, will this actually perhaps place me in a position where I will lose my lovely professorship or whatever because I'm no longer following the rules?
I would ask this thing to start writing grants for me, actually.
No, fair enough, but we do see all the time, right? We see years down the road, someone, one of the other speakers spoke to someone who got caught by claiming he had a Rhodes Scholarship, or Rhodes Scholar, when he couldn't possibly have been one. That tripped him up, despite people already questioning what was coming out in his publications. And it might take 20 years to catch up to you, but at some point you're going to pay.
I use a reference manager to manage all my PDFs, right? I think that's technology. It's not a parallel personality in particular. But I think, I mean, this partly brings me back to what I'm saying about the singularity not being rainbows and unicorns. Clearly there will be some people who don't have a single problem with this. There will be universities who don't have a single problem with it, and there'll be others that do. And the ones that do have a problem will be disadvantaged.
No, and I agree. I'm thinking like, yes, we could probably do a lot of these things already with other types of distributions. So I guess I'd say is, yes, will our policymakers at the institutions we work with recognize or distinguish among this, is this any different than hiring someone to write your paper, or is it exactly the same? And that would be some thinking that will have to be done and may well have to influence the decision you make.
You're going to have to make policy on the hoof here, I think. Scenario number 3. It's getting a bit stickier now. You are diagnosed with a rapidly advancing disease which is incurable. Bad luck. Your doctor recommends that you get uploaded to a new body, which they can grow from your own DNA. So it's not anybody else's body, it's your body, right? He says the process, they're very good at replicating the healthy body exactly. So you'll look just like you do today. And they reckon that they can get your personality at least 80%. Maybe not 100%, but at least 80%. And they're getting better all the time. Your new body will be ready in a week. And your partner says, I don't want to lose you. What are you going to do? And this is where it starts to get really difficult.
If you're a goner already, what do you got to lose?
Right, exactly. Because 80% of your personality is better than 0%, right?
So I would probably go for it, but before that I have a comment about the scenario number 2. That actually happens as we speak. In the World War II there were some dolphins that were trained basically by the British to put some mines on ships. And as we speak, a group of ethicists are trying basically to create a law that would give the dolphins the status of a legal person. So if, for example, the progenies of those dolphins that were trained would, in 10 years from now, sue the British government because their grandfather weren't paid for.
It comes to the idea of what's a person, right?
Yes, exactly. So it's what defines a person, yeah.
So do you want to just take a vote? Who wants to be uploaded? Yeah, like most people. Like when the devil is actually at your heels and you're about to die, suddenly some of your ethical objections melt away. Like if it's dead or alive, I'll choose alive, even if I'm not quite sure what the alive is. Like even if it's not quite, maybe the doctor's like the cutting edge researcher and he's like the first guy to do this in the world and you're the guinea pig, you're the experimental animal. Maybe you'll take that chance. And that's where people go to phase 1 trials and things, like they'll just take anything, something, because it's better than just dying. And I think this is what I'm saying about the fragility thing. There are going to be developments that come along that people will jump at, even though we're not quite sure where they're going to take us. And it's going to take us into some fairly sticky territory. Like, once this person is transferred to the new body, are they legally still them or not? Like if their old body dies and their heart stops, are they dead or alive? Are they still married or not, or partner or not? What if they're not quite the same? Those are sticky parts. Scenario 4 is a different twist on that. So it's your partner this time, and he or she is diagnosed with a rapidly advancing incurable disease, and it's very quick, and they're dead just like that. Or they're hit by a bus, something like that. They're gone just like that. You are devastated. I'm assuming you have a good marriage here. You love your partner. So after the funeral, kind of everything's passed, and you're kind of getting used to the new normal without your partner. You get a phone call out of the blue, and they say, you didn't know about it, but your partner's been doing this brain backup thing. Some form she filled in at work, and she went once a month and got her brain scanned. And if you want, you can bring them back. Actually, Kurzweil's got in a bit of trouble with this because he's lost a bit of credibility by saying that one of his objectives is to bring his dead father back, bring his father back from the dead. But the company says, well, we have her on disk, right? So if you want, we can bring her back. We can upload her. So what do you? And she's paid for it already, right? So you don't have to pay anything. So would you bring her back? I'm getting a yes there.
New body, as in a clone of her previous one, or could be anything.
It's a bit like when you go to the funeral home and there's a range of coffins, right? You can have whatever you want, you know.
The question is, can you refund her if you don't like her anymore?
Well, that's the thing, right? So show of hands, who would bring him or her back? What do you got to lose? Yeah, most people are like, yeah. It wouldn't be the same. So you'd rather have a dead version than a slightly not quite the same as live version? Because yeah. But let's say you say yes, right? And then the guy on the other end of the phone says, well, she's got backups every month for the last 12 months. Which backup do you want me to use? Like the most recent one? Or do you want me to go back before she was sick? Maybe when you bring her back, she's not even going to know she was sick, right? Because if you go back to the backup before that, she won't even remember.
Well, maybe that's the key, though. Every month for the last year or so, well, I'm assuming this person is older than that. So what about the 30 or 40 years before that? That's a personality, not the last year of.
Yeah. So, another question there. We're almost out of time. I got one more question for you.
I think I agree with him. Is the question of self or person, and when you're saying you're backing up, I backed up several years ago or a month, year ago. Wouldn't your experiences and everything that you have seen led up to yourself of who you are?
Yeah.
So, where at the point where you want to go back up would completely be different or irrelevant.
Yeah. There's a good movie on this, Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, about memory and forgetting and backing up and all that stuff. I'll probably leave you with question 5 because it's a bit more philosophical. But I kind of want you to think about this on the bus on the way home tonight. You're uploaded to a substrate of your choice. It can be whatever you like, big or small, or old or young. No eating, no sleeping, no work. You don't need to reproduce. And this new body you've got will last for 10,000 years. And you can switch to a new one if you want a new one. What would you actually do with your time? Like, where would you spend it? Like, on planet or off planet? Who would you spend your time with? And what would you actually do? Because I think maybe in 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 generations, whoever's here after us may have to answer some of these questions. Whenever we take away things like work and death and the body, we're left with questions like, well, why don't we kind of explore the universe? So that's about all I've got to say. Thank you very much for your time. I'll take any questions at the end.